50 years later, she opened the letter, and her world changed forever. An old wooden box, weathered by years of neglect, sat silently in the corner of a forgotten attic. The floor around it was cluttered with remnants of a life long past. Yellowed photographs, cracked picture frames, and relics that had once carried meaning but now only whispered the echoes of time. The box, though, had remained untouched, hidden beneath layers of dust and cobwebs that had built up over decades. It seemed as though the world had forgotten it, as had the memories it contained. But within its dark, wooden confines, there was a single envelope, its paper worn and fragile, the edges curling like the pages of a book that had been opened too many times. The ink that had once boldly spelled out its words had faded, smudged by the hands of time, leaving behind only the faintest traces of what it once was. Yet, despite its age, the envelope held a promise never fulfilled. It was a letter that had waited for years, its words never read, its secrets never shared. Inside it were thoughts, feelings, and memories that had been carefully written, sealed with hope and love, only to be abandoned by fate. And now, as the years drifted by, this forgotten letter lay still, as though the world had decided it would remain unopened, locked away with all the things that time could not erase but had certainly hidden from view. 50 years ago, in a small town where everyone knew each other's names, Emma and James shared a love so pure, so undeniable, that it felt as though nothing in the world could ever separate them. From the very first glance, their souls seemed to recognize each other, and in each other's eyes, they found a home. Their laughter echoed through the streets, their shared dreams were woven together like threads in a tapestry, and every promise they made to each other seemed unbreakable, timeless. It was the kind of love that people spoke of in whispers, hoping they too could experience something so magical. They were destined for each other, or so they believed. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Without warning, a dark shadow of war stretched across their lives, tearing them apart. The day James had to leave, the promise he made to return, felt like an eternity in Emma's heart. The love they once knew was now suspended in time, a love that was never meant to fade. Or so they thought. World. The skies grew heavy with uncertainty, and the ground beneath their feet trembled with the weight of what was to come. James, with a look in his eyes that spoke volumes of the pain he didn't want to show, had no choice but to leave. The urgency in his steps was matched only by the deep sorrow in his heart. He kissed Emma one last time, as though to savor the moment that might never come again, and promised her that he would return. The words were more than just a promise. They were a vow, a lifeline in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. But the war came with no mercy. Days turned into weeks, then into months, and soon, years passed, with no sign of James. Emma waited, her heart heavy with hope that seemed to wither with each passing day. Yet, the silence grew louder, more deafening than the loudest battle cry. The letters stopped, the messages ceased, and Emma found herself alone in a world that had moved on without her. The promise he made remained in the air, lingering like an unfinished melody, but there was no one left to hear it. And so, she was left with silence, an emptiness that could never truly be filled, but would forever echo in her soul. James wrote to her every single day, each letter filled with his thoughts, his love, and the hope that one day, Emma would receive them. In his words, he poured out his soul, recounting memories of their time together, the dreams they had shared, and the pain of being so far apart. Each letter was a lifeline, a bridge between the distance that separated them, and James believed that, no matter what, Emma would eventually read them and know how deeply he cared. But one letter, the most important one of them all, never reached her. It was a letter that held the truths that were never meant to be hidden, but fate had other plans. The world had shifted, the letters became lost in time, and that single, precious letter sat quietly in a drawer, waiting to be discovered. James never knew it would never reach her, that the words he had written so desperately would remain unheard. The truth he had bared so honestly was sealed away in the silence, a truth that was never shared until now. Now, after all these years, the letter lay in Emma's hands, unopened for decades, its secrets waiting to finally be revealed, its words ready to change everything she thought she knew. Emma moved forward, as life often demands we do, weaving a new existence for herself in the years that followed. She found new routines, new friendships, and even a love that, while comforting, could never quite fill the space James had once occupied in her heart. She poured herself into the life she had built, carefully constructing a semblance of happiness from the ashes of the past, convincing herself that she had found peace. But in the quiet moments, when the world slowed down and the noise of everyday life faded, Emma could not escape the quiet tug of the past. It would find her, uninvited, in the stillness of the night or in the fleeting moments of solitude. She would sit by the window, staring out into the distance and wonder, what if? What if James had come back? What if she had stayed in that love, unanswered, unfulfilled? What if the letter he had written had reached her? Would her life have been different? Would their love have endured, or had it simply been a dream that time had stolen away from them? The what-ifs were silent whispers in her mind, a constant ache that never fully healed. They were questions that could never be answered, only pondered, lingering in the corners of her heart like an unfinished story, a chapter that she would never get to read. It was a stormy night, the kind where the wind roared like a wild animal, rattling the windows and bending the trees outside. The rain came down in sheets, as though the sky itself was mourning something long forgotten. Inside the old house, the atmosphere was thick with dust and memories. The dim light from a flickering candle barely cut through the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Emma, her hands trembling from the weight of emotions she hadn't anticipated, was going through the boxes that had been gathering dust for years. She wasn't sure why she'd chosen that night, of all nights, to search through them, but something had pulled her to that forgotten corner of the attic, where time seemed to stand still. She had moved a bookshelf, an old, creaky thing that had long been a fixture in that room, when a loud crash echoed through the house. Books tumbled to the floor, scattering like leaves caught in the wind. In the chaos of papers and forgotten trinkets, her eyes fell on a single, almost glowing white envelope, partially hidden under a pile of old journals. Her heart skipped a beat. There, amid the mess, lay the letter, the one she thought she would never find. The very letter that had been waiting for 50 years, patiently holding onto secrets and promises that time had tried to bury. Her hands, shaking and unsure, reached for it. As she pulled it from the debris, the faintest sound of rustling paper filled the room, almost as if the letter itself was breathing after years of silence. Emma could hardly believe it was real. It was as though the universe had conspired to bring it to her. At last, this letter, hidden away for so long, had finally found its way back into her hands. Her fingers trembled as they carefully gripped the edges of the fragile paper, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The envelope, now slightly crinkled from years of being hidden away, felt like it was alive in her hands, holding more than just ink and words. It carried decades of longing, regret, and unspoken truth. Emma hesitated for a heartbeat, the noise of the storm outside now distant, as if the world around her had fallen away. It was just her, the letter, and the quiet pulse of anticipation in the air. Her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, her emotions swirling like a storm of their own. What if the letter didn't say what she expected? What if it only brought more pain, more unanswered questions? Or perhaps it would answer everything, offering closure she hadn't even known she was seeking. Fear and hope tangled together inside her, and for a moment, she wasn't sure which feeling was stronger. Her hands, though steady in their task, could feel the weight of all those lost years pressing on the paper, as though the words contained within had been waiting far too long to be revealed. With a slow, deliberate movement, she began to unfold the letter. The paper cracked softly under the pressure, the sound delicate but sharp in the stillness of the room. The smell of old ink and time hit her as the folds slowly opened, revealing the words that had waited for half a century to be read. Each word, each letter seemed to pulse with life, as though the letter itself had been holding its breath all these years, waiting for Emma to finally listen. Emma, if you're reading this, know that I never stopped loving you. The words seemed to leap off the page, each syllable etched with such raw emotion that Emma could almost hear his voice, the familiar warmth of his tone, the way he used to say her name, soft, yet filled with unshakable conviction. As her eyes scanned the ink, it felt as though time had folded in on itself, and she was transported back to a time when love had seemed endless. The weight of the words, simple yet profound, wrapped themselves around her heart, squeezing with a tenderness that made her breath catch in her throat. It was as though James had been speaking directly to her, from a time long past, from a place she thought she had left behind. For all the years of silence, the unanswered questions, the doubts that had quietly plagued her heart, this one sentence held a truth that she hadn't dared to hope for. The love they had shared, the connection that had once seemed unbreakable, had never been forgotten by him. He hadn't stopped loving her, not for a single moment, even through the miles and the years. Her mind reeled, and her chest tightened as she read the words again, her fingers lightly tracing the ink as if to make sure this wasn't some dream, some figment of her imagination. It felt almost too impossible, too perfect in its simplicity. Yet there it was, a message that spanned time and distance, a reminder that love, real love, never truly fades. It only waits, patiently, for the right moment to be revealed. James had never left her willingly. The truth of it was buried deep beneath the surface, hidden in the shadows of their shared past. But now, as the words unfolded before her, Emma could feel the weight of the unspoken truth pressing down on her chest. He hadn't chosen to walk away from her side. He had been torn from it, torn by the very circumstances of a world that had shown no mercy. He had been injured, gravely so, in a way that left him not just physically scarred but broken in spirit. The pain had kept him from returning to her, from writing the letters that had once poured from his soul. For months, there had been nothing, no word, no sign, no message that could explain the silence that had fallen between them. He had been lost, both to the chaos of war and to the fragile thread of life itself. And when he finally found his way back, his body battered and bruised but his heart still longing for her, he had returned to a world that had moved on without him. The house they had dreamed of building together was now empty. The love they had promised each other seemed like a distant memory, something that had slipped through their fingers, unnoticed by both. When he had finally returned, exhausted and broken, she was gone. He had searched, desperate for her, only to find that the woman he had loved so fiercely had disappeared, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than anything he had ever known. Tears blurred her vision as she read those words, each sentence cutting through her like a blade, sharp and relentless. She could feel the weight of the years pressing on her chest, the sorrow, the longing, the unanswered questions that had never truly left her heart. As the ink on the paper blurred in front of her, Emma's mind raced. Had she read this letter earlier, would it have changed everything? Would her life have been different if, in the years that followed his departure, she had known the truth? Would she have waited for him, held on to the hope that he would return, just as he had promised? Or would the pain of his absence still have driven her away, chasing her into a new life, a new love, to escape the ache of a love lost to time and circumstance? The what-ifs spiraled in her mind like a whirlwind. Would they have rebuilt what they once had? Or would the weight of the years apart have proven too much to overcome? Every question seemed to carry with it 1,000 more, all of them circling back to the same impossible thought. Was there still time for them? In that moment, with the letter clutched tightly in her hands, Emma felt both the bitter sting of regret and the faintest flicker of hope. Could love, lost and hidden away for so long, be found again? Or had time, with its cruel way of shifting everything beyond recognition, already made the answer clear? Emma traced her fingers over his words, each letter an echo of a time long past, a time when their love had been young and pure, untouched by the cruel hand of time. The ink was faded, yet the power of the words seemed to pulse beneath her fingertips, as though they were alive, carrying the weight of everything they had shared. With every movement of her hand, memories of their youth came rushing back in waves, vivid, sharp, and almost painful in their clarity. She remembered the way his laughter used to fill the air, the sound so full of life, so genuine, it could chase away any storm. She remembered the first time their hands had touched, the electricity that sparked between them, a feeling so powerful it seemed impossible that it could ever fade. They had dreamed of forever together, of building a life side by side, never imagining that fate would tear them apart. Now, as her fingers lingered on the fragile paper, those memories flooded her heart, each one a beautiful reminder of a love that once felt infinite. The world around her seemed to blur, and for a moment, she was transported back to those simpler days, the days when she had known nothing but him, nothing but the feeling of being cherished. It was as though the letter had opened a door she thought had been sealed shut forever, and behind it lay a world she had long since buried in the recesses of her mind. The tender moments, the whispered promises, the dreams they had woven together, they were all alive again, in the space between the past and present, between what had been and what could have been. With a heart full of unanswered questions, each one a weight she could no longer carry alone, Emma made a decision that seemed impossible but inevitable. She had spent years burying the past, trying to move forward, telling herself that the life she had built was enough. But now, with the letter in her hands and the truth finally revealed, the echoes of their lost love reverberated in her soul, demanding to be heard. The silence that had once felt like a comfort now felt like a prison, trapping her in a world that had never fully healed. Her mind raced, torn between fear and hope. The path ahead was uncertain, the future unknown, but the pull of the past was undeniable. She couldn't keep living with the question that haunted her. What if? What if he still cared for her? What if they could rebuild what they once had? Or what if the years between them had changed everything so completely that nothing could ever bring them back together? But in that moment, standing in the quiet of her home, Emma knew she couldn't rest until she found the answers. She had to know. And so, with trembling hands and a heart that both ached and yearned, she set out on a journey that would take her to the man she once loved. The journey that, for better or worse, would answer the questions she had carried for so long. An old house, worn by time but still standing strong against the weight of the years. The paint had peeled in places, and the once lush garden had been overtaken by wildflowers and weeds, but it was still the same house, the one she had known so well, the one where their love had bloomed before fate had torn them apart. As Emma stood at the threshold, staring at the door she hadn't knocked on in 50 years, a flood of memories rushed over her, memories of laughter shared in the kitchen, of quiet evenings by the fire, of promises whispered under the stars. Back then, this house had been filled with life, love, and the certainty that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. But now, standing alone in front of it, everything had changed. The world around her seemed eerily still, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she had the strength to go forward. The years had been kind and cruel to her, to them both. Time had stretched so far between then and now, leaving gaps she couldn't fill with words, only with questions. Would he still be here? Would he remember her the way she remembered him? Would the man she had once loved, the man who had left without a trace, still exist behind that door? Or had time changed him too much for her to recognize? Her heart raced in her chest as her hand hovered over the doorbell. She thought about turning away, about leaving the past buried. But something inside her told her this was the only way to find the closure she had searched for all these years. With a breath that seemed to tremble in her lungs, she rang the bell. The sound echoed through the quiet house, as though it too was holding its breath, waiting for the past to collide with the present. The door creaked open slowly, its sound like a whisper from the past, and there he stood. James, the man she had once known so well, the man who had once been her everything. But now, as the door fully swung open, Emma felt a rush of emotions that she wasn't quite prepared for. He was older, frilier than she remembered. The passage of time etched clearly into the lines of his face, his hair now grayed and thinning. His shoulders, once broad and strong, were now hunched with age, and there was a certain weariness in his posture that spoke of a life lived with quiet sorrow. Yet, despite the years, despite the changes that had come with time, there was one thing that hadn't changed. His eyes. The same eyes that had once looked at her with all the love in the world, now still holding that same depth, that same tenderness. As they met hers, a flicker of recognition, of longing, passed between them, a silent understanding that all the years apart had not erased what they had shared. The years had taken much from them, but it had not taken the love they had once promised each other. Emma's breath caught in her throat, the sight of him both a relief and a heart-wrenching ache all at once. Time had stolen so much from them, but in that moment, standing before him, she saw the truth. The love they had was still alive, still waiting, still burning quietly beneath the surface. And for the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. The door creaked open slowly. It sounded like a whisper from the past, and there he stood. James, the man she had once known so well, the man who had once been her everything. But now, as the door fully swung open, Emma felt a rush of emotions that she wasn't quite prepared for. He was older, frilier than she remembered. The passage of time etched clearly into the lines of his face, his hair now grayed and thinning. His shoulders, once broad and strong, were now hunched with age, and there was a certain weariness in his posture that spoke of a life lived with quiet sorrow. Yet, despite the years, despite the changes that had come with time, there was one thing that hadn't changed. His eyes. The same eyes that had once looked at her with all the love in the world, now still holding that same depth, that same tenderness. As they met hers, a flicker of recognition, of longing, passed between them, a silent understanding that all the years apart had not erased what they had shared. The years had taken much from them, but it had not taken the love they had once promised each other. Emma's breath caught in her throat, the sight of him both a relief and a heart-wrenching ache all at once. Time had stolen so much from them, but in that moment, standing before him, she saw the truth. The love they had was still alive, still waiting, still burning quietly beneath the surface. And for the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Here's a paragraph that encourages viewers to engage with your content. If you've enjoyed this story of love that defied time, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring these timeless tales to life, and we'd love for you to be part of our growing community. Share the love by hitting the bell icon so you never miss an emotional journey like this. Whether you're new or a longtime viewer, your engagement means everything to us. Let's keep the magic of love stories alive together.